Universities are meant to mold the leaders of tomorrow, places of learning, growth, and guidance. But what happens when the very people entrusted to shape young minds exploit that trust? When a mentor, meant to inspire, turns predator? Behind the brick walls and bright classrooms, sometimes, there are shadows, dark secrets. This is not just another story about a student and a teacher. This is a real-life story about a bright young woman with her whole future ahead of her, and a respected lecturer whose desire to protect his reputation led him to commit the unthinkable. A story that will leave you questioning, how well do we really know those we trust with our future? Because sometimes, the person shaping your future could be the one plotting your end. Before we jump into this incredible story, take a moment to comment below and tell us where you're tuning in from. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will shock you, inspire you, and sometimes break your heart. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to the world. Now, let's dive in, because this is a story you won't forget. Every so often, a student steps onto a campus and becomes more than just another face in the crowd. They become a force, a voice that can't be ignored. That was Julia Spencer. At just 22, she wasn't like most students. She stood out, sharp-minded, fiercely determined, and wise beyond her years. The kind of young woman who made you stop and listen when she spoke. Professors respected her. Students admired her. Even the university's top officials knew her name. Julia had recently achieved something that few could ever dream of. She had been elected student government president at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, a rare feat especially for a young woman, especially for someone like Julia. You see, Julia wasn't born into privilege. She didn't come from wealth. She came from struggle. She was raised by her mother, Angela Spencer, a single parent, working long shifts to make ends meet. Their home? A small apartment in a rough neighborhood where every day was a fight to survive. Julia had seen injustice up close. She had seen friends pulled into crime. She had seen families broken by poverty. And she had seen how society turned its back on people like them. But instead of letting it defeat her, Julia rose above it. She made a promise to herself and to her mother. She would make something of her life. She would not be another statistic. She would become a civil rights attorney. She would fight for those who had no voice, because she knew what it was like to feel powerless. Julia was the first in her family to go to college. A full scholarship paid her tuition, but barely covered anything else. Most days, money was tight. Some weeks there wasn't enough to buy food, but Julia didn't complain. When others partied, she studied. When others slept, she worked, balancing her classes, her leadership role, and a part-time job at a legal aid office, helping those in need. Friends admired her drive, but they worried about her too. There were nights when Julia would fall asleep at her desk, exhausted from balancing it all. She'd survive on 2 or 3 hours of sleep, fueled only by cheap coffee and sheer willpower. There were days when she skipped meals, just so she could afford books or help her mother with rent. But if you asked Julia how she was doing, she would smile and say, "I'm fine, I've got this." That was Julia, tough, resilient, strong, but carrying a weight that few could see. Her friends would later describe her as the girl who had it all together, but was holding everything up alone. And while everyone on campus knew her as Julia Spencer, the future lawyer, the leader, the inspiration, no one knew the pressure she felt. No one knew how heavy that burden truly was. Julia had fought so hard to build her future, but what she didn't know was that someone she trusted, someone she looked up to, would take it all away. When you step onto that university campus, there's one name everyone knows, one man who commands respect and fear in equal measure. Dr. Robert Caldwell. For over 20 years, his voice has echoed through the grand lecture halls, shaping young minds, molding the future leaders of the country. A towering figure both in stature and reputation. Sharp suits, polished shoes, a gaze that could freeze you in place or inspire you to greatness. When Dr. Caldwell speaks, you listen. When he enters a room, the chatter dies down. Students sit up straighter. Professors lower their voices, because Dr. Caldwell is more than just a lecturer. He's a gatekeeper to success, a kingmaker. He's the kind of professor who could make or break your future with a single recommendation letter. The kind of man who could open doors to the nation's most powerful law firms or slam them shut forever. His specialty? Political science, power dynamics, governance, subjects that in his hands feel less like theories and more like weapons. Students say his lectures are unforgettable. Some leave inspired, others leave trembling, but no one leaves unchanged. You either rise to his standard or you crumble under his gaze. And for those who survive, they go far. Some of his former students now walk the halls of government, sit in boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies, or argue high-profile cases in courtrooms across the nation. Many of them say the same thing. I wouldn't be here without Dr. Caldwell. But behind the admiration, there's something else, something unspoken. Fear. Students whisper about his temper, about the times his voice shook the walls when a student fell short, about the moments he pushed just a little too hard, cutting down someone's confidence like it was nothing. But no one dared challenge him, because his power stretched beyond the classroom, because his word carried weight, and his connections ran deep. And so, even those who feared him respected him. Even those who hated him needed him. To the outside world, Dr. Robert Caldwell was the picture of success, a highly sought-after speaker invited to national conferences on politics and ethics, a man frequently quoted in newspapers, a trusted voice on matters of leadership and governance. But it wasn't just his professional life that looked perfect. His family was the kind people envied. His wife, Linda Caldwell, warm, gentle, a nurse loved by everyone who knew her, the kind of woman who brought homemade cookies to charity events and volunteered at the school library. Their two children, Olivia and Ethan. Olivia, 14, shy, bookish, always with a novel tucked under her arm. Ethan, 17, the basketball star, charismatic, popular, the kind of kid other parents wished their child could be. Together they looked like a family pulled from a magazine. When Dr. Caldwell brought them to university events, they would smile for the cameras, shake hands with faculty, stand proudly beside him, the perfect academic family. But behind those smiles and handshakes were cracks. Cracks no one could see unless they looked closely, because behind closed doors the truth was different. Dr. Caldwell and Linda had not shared a bed in years. They slept in separate rooms, passing each other like strangers in their own home. Their marriage had turned cold, a relationship held together only for the sake of the children and appearances. Linda was kind, patient, but tired. She had sacrificed so much to support his career, and in return, she felt invisible. Caldwell, on the other hand, felt trapped in a life that looked perfect to everyone else, but felt empty to him. He craved the respect he got at the university, the power he held over students, the admiration in their eyes. At home, he was just a husband, a father, another man in a quiet house, and he resented it. He resented the quiet, the routine, the lack of excitement. There were whispers, of course, rumors, that Dr. Caldwell had crossed the line before, that there had been affairs, young students who got too close, but nothing was ever proven, and no one was brave enough to ask him directly, because who would question a man like Robert Caldwell? Who would risk their future, their career, to go against him? Even his colleagues, those who worked beside him for years, sensed his temper. They had seen the flashes of anger behind closed doors. They had felt the tension when he was pushed too far. But no one said a word, because Caldwell wasn't just a professor, he was an institution. He was untouchable. But power is a dangerous thing, and when you have it for too long, you start to believe you can do anything, even the unthinkable. Because Robert Caldwell wasn't just shaping futures, he was hiding a secret that would destroy everything he had built and take a young life with it. At first it was nothing, just two people, one young, ambitious, and full of dreams, and the other older, respected, and wise, brought together by work. It all seemed so normal, so professional. Julia Spencer, in her new role as student government president, was determined to make a real difference on campus. She wanted to leave a legacy, to be remembered as someone who fought for the students, someone who stood up when others stayed silent. And to achieve that, she knew she needed help. She needed guidance from someone who knew the system, someone with experience, someone with power. That someone was Dr. Robert Caldwell. Caldwell was an advisor to the university's political outreach programs, a key figure in shaping how the university engaged with lawmakers and the community. He was the man students went to when they wanted to make real change. And for Julia, working with him felt like an honor, a privilege. Their first few meetings were formal, strictly business. Julia would arrive with a notebook in hand, her ideas neatly written down. She would sit across from Caldwell in his office, her back straight, eager to prove herself. She spoke with passion, conviction, and Caldwell listened. He watched her. He saw the fire in her eyes. The same fire he had once felt decades earlier when he was a young man chasing his dreams. And in Julia, he saw potential. He saw himself. After those first few meetings, Caldwell was impressed. Julia wasn't just another eager student hoping for extra credit. She was smart, sharp, and determined. She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to work for it. Caldwell would later tell his colleagues that Julia was special, a rare kind of student you only meet once in your career. But at the time, it was just admiration, nothing more. Or at least, that's what Caldwell told himself, because Julia admired him too. She had read about his achievements, heard the stories about his former students who had gone on to hold powerful positions. To her, Dr. Caldwell was everything she hoped to be one day. Smart, respected, successful. She listened intently whenever he spoke. She took notes on everything he said. And when he praised her, her heart swelled, because it meant something. Coming from him, it meant everything. But something started to shift, quietly, almost without either of them noticing. Those strictly business meetings, they grew longer. The tone became softer, more familiar. There were moments, small moments, that didn't feel like work. Moments where Caldwell would lean back in his chair, and the conversation would drift away from policies and campus budgets. He would ask Julia about her life, her goals, her dreams. And Julia? She opened up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. She told him about her mother, about the sacrifices she made. She spoke about growing up in a neighborhood where hope felt like a luxury. She talked about the fear of failure, that constant pressure to succeed, not just for herself, but for everyone back home. Caldwell listened closely. He nodded at all the right moments. He made her feel heard, understood, valued. And then he started to open up too. He told Julia about his family, the perfect family everyone saw at events. But he hinted that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. He spoke about the pressures of his career, how the weight of expectations never really goes away, no matter how high you climb. He mentioned the loneliness, the feeling that sometimes success can feel like a cage. Julia felt honored that he trusted her with these truths, secrets he didn't share with just anyone. She saw him not just as a professor, but as a person, a man. And that's how it began. Slowly, subtly, a bond started to form. A connection. At the time, neither of them would have called it dangerous. Neither of them would have seen it for what it was becoming. But those innocent conversations, those moments of trust, those shared secrets, they were planting a seed that would grow into something neither of them could control. A seed that would lead to a mistake, a secret, and a crime that would shatter both their lives. What starts as harmless doesn't always stay that way. Sometimes it shifts so slowly, so quietly, that you don't even see the line until you've already crossed it. That's what happened with Julia Spencer and Dr. Robert Caldwell. At first, their meetings were innocent, professional, necessary. But soon, those meetings stretched longer into the night. What started as discussions about campus policies became conversations that drifted far from work. Laughter replaced formal handshakes. Glances lingered a little too long. Silence no longer felt awkward, it felt comfortable. And then it changed. One evening, after a long meeting about a new student initiative, Caldwell leaned back in his chair and said, "You've been working so hard. Let me treat you to dinner. You deserve it." It sounded so simple, so casual, but for Julia, it meant everything. Here was Dr. Caldwell offering to spend more time with her outside the office, just the two of them. How could she say no? They sat in a quiet corner of a small restaurant just off campus, a place where faculty sometimes went, but never students. It felt safe. The conversation flowed easily. Work, life, dreams, fears. But beneath the laughter, beneath the smiles, there was something else, something unspoken. And then it happened. It was so small, so subtle, that Julia didn't even realize what it was at first. Caldwell reached across the table, and his hand brushed against hers, but he didn't pull away, and neither did she. His fingers lingered, gently curling around hers, just for a moment. And in that moment, the air shifted. Julia's heart raced, her face flushed, but she didn't move her hand away. This was the man she admired, the man she trusted, touching her, choosing her. And for the first time, she felt like more than just a student. She felt special. Caldwell looked at her, not as a professor, but as a man, and Julia looked back, feeling seen in a way she never had before. After that night, everything was different. The meetings became more frequent but less about work. The dinners became regular but always private, and the touches became bolder. A hand on the lower back as he guided her out of the office, a brush of fingers across her cheek when he complimented her ideas, a hug that lasted a few seconds too long, but neither of them let go. And each time Julia felt more important, more wanted, more his. Caldwell's praise shifted too. It was no longer just about her work. It became about her, her smile, her mind, her beauty. "You're different, Julia. You're going places. You're not like the others." And Julia believed him, because she wanted to believe him. She thought he saw what no one else did. She thought he believed in her, not just as a leader, but as a woman. And then one night, in Caldwell's office, after hours, the doors locked, the building empty, the desk lamp casting soft shadows, they stood close, too close, talking about her future, about his connections, about how he could help her go anywhere she wanted. And then, his hand brushed her hair back, his thumb tracing her jawline. Their eyes met, their breathing slowed, and the kiss came, soft but deliberate, a kiss that neither of them stopped. That night, the line was not just crossed, it was shattered. Julia and Caldwell began an affair, hidden from the world, a secret that felt exciting, dangerous, and to Julia, almost magical. But to Caldwell, it was power, a new kind of control. And what neither of them knew was that this was the beginning of something that would destroy them both. Secrets have a way of changing people. At first they feel exciting, dangerous, like you're part of something special, something no one else could understand. Slowly, that same secret becomes a cage, and the walls begin to close in. That's exactly what happened to Julia Spencer. In the early days of her affair with Dr. Robert Caldwell, everything felt like a dream. She felt chosen, wanted, valued in a way she never had been before. She believed this was love, but love shouldn't feel like this, and it didn't take long for that dream to turn into something much darker. Julia started pulling away from the people who knew her best, friends, classmates, even the members of her student government team. They noticed. The girl who had once led protests with a megaphone in hand, fierce, loud, unstoppable, suddenly seemed harder to find. The girl who used to organize late-night study sessions with her best friends stopped showing up. At first, she made excuses. "I'm just busy. Student government is taking up so much time. I'm swamped with work." And her friends believed her, because that was Julia. She had always been busy, always juggling a million things at once. But soon, the excuses turned into silence. Messages left unread, calls ignored, plans canceled over and over again. Her friends began to worry. But when they asked her if everything was okay, she smiled. She always smiled, and she would say, "I'm fine, don't worry about me. I've got it under control." But she didn't. Behind that smile, Julia was slipping away, because while her friends thought she was just busy with school, the truth was, she was with Caldwell, in his office, in his car, sometimes in a small rented apartment across town. Always hidden, always careful, always secret. And the secrecy began to change Caldwell too. At first he had been charming, gentle, the mentor who saw her potential. But now, he was becoming something else. Protective, but not in the way that makes you feel safe. Possessive, in a way that makes you feel trapped. He started asking questions, subtle at first, but always there. "Who were you with last night? That guy in your class, is he bothering you? You can tell me if someone's making you uncomfortable." At first, it felt like he cared, but then it became more. "You shouldn't trust everyone, Julia. People will try to use you. Not everyone wants what's best for you. Be careful who you talk to. Focus on what we're building together. That's what matters." And slowly, Julia listened. She trusted him. She believed he was looking out for her. So when he suggested she stop spending so much time with certain friends, she did. When he warned her that dating someone her age would be a distraction, she believed him, because why would she need anyone else when she had him? What Julia didn't see was that this wasn't love. This was control. And while Caldwell was pulling her deeper into his world, his own life was starting to crumble. At home, Linda Caldwell noticed the difference. She had been married to Robert for nearly 20 years. She knew him better than anyone, or at least she thought she did. She noticed the late nights, the sudden work emergencies, the way he checked his phone more often, turning the screen away when she walked into the room. She noticed how his touch, already rare, became almost non-existent. He was there but distant, like a shadow of the man she had married. One night, as they sat in the living room, the TV on but neither really watching, she looked at him and asked softly, "Is everything okay?" Caldwell didn't even look up from his phone. He just muttered, "Yeah. Work's just been a lot lately." And that was it. A short answer. Linda didn't push, because that's what you do in a marriage, right? You trust. You give space. You believe the person you love is telling you the truth. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. And while she was hoping it was just work stress, the truth was so much worse. Because while Linda sat alone in that quiet house, Julia was somewhere else, falling deeper into a relationship built on secrets and lies, a relationship that would soon spiral out of control, a relationship that would lead to the unthinkable. Everything was spiraling so fast, but to Julia, it still felt like love. Messy, complicated, but love, until the day everything changed. It started with something small, a missed period, then another. At first she brushed it off. Stress, she thought. I'm just stressed. All the late nights, all the pressure, it's messing with my body. Apple smiled. But deep down, she knew, and when she finally worked up the courage to take a pregnancy test, her whole world shifted. 2 lines, positive. Julia stared at it, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She sank onto the floor of her tiny apartment bathroom, staring at that little stick over and over again, as if somehow it would change. But it didn't. She was pregnant, and suddenly, the reality of everything hit her like a wave. This wasn't just a secret relationship anymore. This was real. This was life. A child. His child. But, after the shock settled, something else started to grow inside her. Hope, because Julia believed maybe this was it. Maybe this was their future finally coming together. She pictured telling Caldwell, him taking her hand, whispering that they would figure it out together, that this was the sign they needed to finally stop hiding, to finally be free, because he loved her. Didn't he? He had said she was special, that she was different. She wasn't like the others. She believed he would choose her, choose their baby. But she was wrong. When Julia told Robert Caldwell, everything changed. They were in his office, the door locked like always. She had practiced the words over and over, trying to get it just right. But when she finally said it, "I'm pregnant," the room went silent. Caldwell froze. His face, usually so confident, so composed, drained of color. And in his eyes, Julia didn't see excitement. She didn't see love. She saw fear. For the first time since she had known him, Dr. Caldwell looked afraid. He leaned forward, his voice low, sharp, almost like a whisper, but heavy with panic. "Are you sure?" Julia nodded, her heart breaking a little with every second that passed. And then his first question wasn't, "How are you feeling?" or "What do you want to do?" It was, "Does anyone else know?" That's when Julia knew. This wasn't the reaction she had dreamed of. He wasn't happy. He wasn't relieved. He was terrified. Because for Caldwell, this wasn't a future. This was a threat. A scandal like this could destroy him. His career gone. His family broken. His reputation shattered. Everything he had built, everything he had worked for, could come crashing down because of this. Because of her. Because of the baby. He tried to stay calm, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "Julia, we can't do this. You know that, right? We can't have this baby." Julia felt her heart stop. Her chest tightened. "I mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, but she knew what he meant. She just didn't want to believe it. Caldwell leaned in closer, his eyes desperate. "You need to end this. It's the only way. I'll pay for everything. I'll take care of it. But this can't happen." Julia felt the tears welling up in her eyes, her hands shaking. This was the man who said he loved her, who said she was different, who said she mattered. And now he wanted her to erase it all, erase their baby, erase their future, erase everything like it was nothing. "No, I can't, I won't." she whispered. Her voice broke, but her resolve didn't. This was her baby, their baby, a part of her, and she wouldn't let him take that away. But Caldwell didn't see it that way. To him, this was a problem, a mistake that needed fixing, quickly, quietly, permanently. The man who once made her feel like the most important person in the world now looked at her like a burden. And for the first time, Julia realized she was alone. She thought he would protect her, but now she was starting to wonder if he was the one she needed protection from. Julia thought things couldn't get worse after that conversation in his office, but she was wrong, because when she refused to get rid of the baby, when she stood her ground, everything changed. Caldwell was no longer the man who had once called her special, who had promised to help her reach her dreams. The warmth in his voice, the affection in his eyes, was gone. He became cold, distant, different, almost like she was no longer a person to him, but a problem, a threat. Julia felt it every time they spoke. The tension, the fear, the way he chose his words carefully, like every sentence was part of a strategy. He wasn't trying to love her anymore. He was trying to control her, trying to make her back down. But Julia wouldn't. She couldn't. This was her child, her future, her life. And so one day, she made a choice that would seal her fate. She looked Caldwell in the eyes and said, "If you won't take responsibility, I will tell everyone." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Caldwell's face didn't flinch, but his eyes did. For the first time, she saw something behind that calm exterior. Not fear, not regret, but anger. Cold, silent, dangerous. In that moment, Julia saw what she had never allowed herself to see before. This wasn't just a respected professor. This wasn't just a man who made a mistake. This was someone who would do anything to protect himself, and she had just threatened everything he cared about. Caldwell knew it too. If this got out, he would lose everything. His career, his reputation, his family, his legacy. Everything he had built over 2 decades could be destroyed with one word from Julia. And as she left his office that day, Caldwell sat there, staring at the door, silent, still, calculating, because in his mind Julia was no longer someone he loved. She was something he needed to silence. For good. It happened so quickly, but the planning had started long before. After Julia's threat, Caldwell knew there were only 2 options. Either his life would fall apart or Julia would disappear. And so, he made his choice. He texted her one evening, just like he used to in the beginning. His tone was gentle, almost apologetic. He told her he wanted to talk, to work things out, to discuss their future together. And Julia believed him, because despite everything, a part of her still loved him. A part of her still hoped. So when he asked her to meet him somewhere private, away from campus, somewhere they wouldn't be seen, she said yes. She thought this was the moment everything would be okay, that he had finally chosen her. But she didn't know. She was walking into a trap. The spot was remote, far from the university, far from anyone who could hear her scream. A wooded area, quiet, isolated, the kind of place no one would think twice about. When she arrived, Caldwell was already there, standing by his car. He smiled when he saw her, but it wasn't the same smile she remembered. There was tension in the air, but Julia pushed it aside. She wanted to believe this was their chance, their fresh start. But it wasn't. They talked. Or at least they tried to. Caldwell's words were rehearsed, carefully chosen, but Julia saw through them. She knew he didn't mean it. She knew he was still trying to control her. And then the argument began. Voices rising, tears falling. Julia pleading with him to accept their child, to be the man she thought he was. Caldwell insisting it would ruin them both, telling her she was being selfish. And then she said it again, that same threat. If you won't stand by me, I will tell the truth. And that's when he snapped. All the fear, the anger, the desperation exploded in that single moment. Caldwell's hands wrapped around her throat before she could even react. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She fought. She clawed at his hands, kicked her legs. But he was stronger and determined. The trees around them stood still, bearing witness to the horror. The birds in the distance kept singing, as if nothing was happening. But for Julia, everything was ending. Seconds felt like hours, until finally, her body stopped moving. Her arms dropped to her sides, her chest no longer rising. Caldwell stood there, breathless, his hands still around her neck, staring down at the woman he had once called special, the woman who trusted him, the woman carrying his child, and now she was gone. The panic came next, but it didn't last long, because Caldwell was a man who had spent his life staying in control. He dragged her body into a shallow grave he had already prepared, covering her with dirt and leaves. He took her phone, deleted their messages, wiped away every trace of what they were to each other, and there he drove home, to his wife, to his kids, to his perfect life. He walked into that house like nothing had happened, a kiss on the cheek for Linda, a nod to his son, a smile to his daughter, and as they sat down for dinner, he picked up his fork and ate his meal. Because in his mind the problem was solved. Julia Spencer was gone, and no one would ever know. Or so he thought. When Julia Spencer didn't show up to her morning classes, her friends were the first to notice. At first they thought maybe she was sick, or just overwhelmed, maybe she needed a break. But as the hours passed and the messages went unanswered, that worry grew. By the end of the day, Julia's best friend called her mother, and when Angela Spencer picked up the phone, she knew something was wrong before a word was even spoken. That mother's instinct, that cold feeling in your chest when you just know, Julia was missing. The police were contacted almost immediately, and the search began. Flyers with Julia's smiling face plastered across campus. Social media flooded with desperate posts. "Have you seen Julia Spencer?" Students gathering, holding candles, praying, hoping. And there, right in the middle of it all, was Dr. Robert Caldwell, the concerned professor, the supportive mentor, the pillar of the community, leading the search efforts, comforting Julia's friends, standing beside her mother. His voice was steady, calm, reassuring. His words were perfect, crafted with care, the kind of man you would trust in your darkest moment. But behind those eyes was the man who knew exactly where Julia was. While others searched the campus gardens and libraries, Caldwell steered them away from the woods. While officers questioned students, he subtly guided them toward rumors of Julia being stressed, maybe needing time alone. While Angela Spencer sobbed into his shoulder, Caldwell whispered, "We'll find her, I promise." Every tear he shed, every hug he gave, every speech he made, it was all a lie, because he knew they were never going to find Julia alive, not unless they looked in the wrong place, at the wrong time, and saw the truth he had buried. But secrets don't stay buried forever. A quiet Sunday morning, a couple of hikers out for a walk miles away from campus, deep in the woods. They weren't looking for Julia. They were just looking for a trail. But what they found was something far worse. A patch of disturbed earth, a faint smell, something wrong. And when they looked closer, they saw it, a hand. Julia Spencer had been found. The news spread like wildfire. Students crying in the halls, professors standing in silence, Angela Spencer collapsing to the floor when the officers came to her door. And Caldwell? He was there, like always, offering his condolences. But this time, his mask was slipping. The investigation intensified, and the truth started to unravel. Phone records showed late-night calls between Caldwell and Julia, far more than he had admitted. Surveillance cameras captured his car leaving campus the night Julia disappeared, heading toward those same woods. Students whispered about their strange relationship, about the long hours behind closed doors. And then there was the text, one message, deleted from Julia's phone but recovered by investigators. A message from Caldwell asking to meet, the night she vanished. That was the final piece. The respected professor, the trusted mentor, the man who led the search parties, was the same man who took Julia's life. Police arrived at his home, knocking on his door as his children watched from the window. Linda Caldwell standing behind him, confused, scared. As they placed the cuffs on his wrists, the man who had built a career teaching about power, control, leadership, now powerless, now led away like a criminal. Because no matter how smart you are, no matter how careful you try to be, the truth always finds a way out. Courtrooms are supposed to be places of truth, of justice, but sometimes they feel more like rooms filled with ghosts. Ghosts of what was and what could have been. That's what it felt like when the trial of Dr. Robert Caldwell began. The man who had once commanded lecture halls with his booming voice now sat silent, head down, dressed not in his sharp suits, but in a prison uniform. The man who had once built futures had now destroyed his own. The evidence was overwhelming. The messages, the surveillance, the phone records, the shallow grave. And yet, it was the voices of those left behind that broke the room. Angela Spencer, Julia's mother, took the stand first. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, her voice cracking with every word. She didn't speak about evidence. She spoke about Julia. She spoke about the little girl who used to hold her hand while walking to the bus stop, the teenager who stayed up late studying because she wanted to change the world, the young woman who called her every Sunday just to say, "I love you, Mom." And now? That voice was gone, that future stolen. Angela looked Caldwell in the eyes through her tears and asked the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Well, why my baby?" But Caldwell had no answer. He just looked away. Then came Linda Caldwell. His wife, the woman who had built a home with him, raised his children, stood beside him at university dinners, smiling. While he was living a lie, she spoke about betrayal, about the nights she waited for him to come home, about the moment police took him away, with their children watching from the window. Her voice didn't shake with tears. It trembled with anger, with hurt, with humiliation. She said, "I gave you everything. You destroyed it all. For what?" Their son, Ethan, just 17, refused to look at his father. Their daughter Olivia sobbed quietly in the corner. Because they didn't lose a father that day, they lost the idea of who they thought he was. The jury didn't need long. Guilty on all counts. And when the judge spoke the final words, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Caldwell didn't flinch. He just stared ahead, like he was still in control. But he wasn't. Not anymore. He was no longer the kingmaker, no longer the man who held power over others. He was just a prisoner, a man who traded his entire world for a secret affair, and took an innocent life to protect a lie. The trial ended, but the pain didn't. For Angela Spencer, she lost her only daughter, her pride, her future. But Angela chose to turn her pain into something that would last. She started the Julia Spencer Memorial Scholarship to help young women, just like her daughter, pursue their dreams, so that Julia's name would live on. For Linda Caldwell, the marriage ended, the papers were signed, the ring came off, but the scars remained. Their children, Olivia and Ethan, cut off contact with their father. To them, he died the day he took Julia's life. And the university? They changed their policies. Faculty-student relationships were now strictly prohibited. Whispers of other cases surfaced. Affairs, abuses of power, things that had been ignored for years, because sometimes it takes a tragedy to wake people up. But for those closest to Julia, no rule change, no scholarship, no guilty verdict could bring her back. She was gone, a brilliant young woman with dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney, buried in a shallow grave, because she trusted the wrong person. How many students place their futures in the hands of mentors they trust? How many young women look up to their professors, believing they see their potential when, in reality, they see something else? How many stories, like Julia's, remain hidden, waiting for someone brave enough to expose the truth? Power is a dangerous thing, and when it is placed in the wrong hands, it can destroy lives. Julia believed she was building her future. She didn't know she was walking into her end. So stay vigilant, question those in power, because the person you trust could be the one hiding the darkest secret. Thank you for watching. Before you go, let us know in the comments, what did this story make you feel? And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue sharing these stories that deserve to be told.